What's going on? This is the Too Tall Sports Podcast. Thank you for joining me today. My guest is Mike Guardabascio. He is a Long Beach, California sports writer covering mostly local sports and mostly the high school and college circuit. But we have him on today. Great conversation, and we'll get to that interview in a minute. But tonight is game 6 of the NBA Finals between the Golden State Warriors and the Boston Celtics. Very interesting matchup. It's been a pretty good series for the most part, back and forth. This was the first time, I believe, Boston lost back-to-back games, games 4 and 5 in the playoffs. Otherwise, they had not lost back-to-back games so far this postseason. And even game 5, this was, Steph had a bad night shooting, but the rest of his teammates picked him up. And this is a crucial game, right? Usually the winner of game 5 wins the series. And so game 6 tonight in Boston, it's going to be interesting. The Warriors could win their 4th championship in the last, 8 years or so. 6 finals in 8 years. Whether you believe this matters or not, this catapult Steph Curry into the top 10 all time already, and the dude's still playing. And a lot of people will tell you, championship or not, he may already be there. But having a 4th ring that would tie him with LeBron, so he's already passed. He's already got more than Durant by default, just because he wasn't there for the first one, but this is a big deal, for a lot of people. You got people like Draymond Green, who is, not had the greatest series offensively, but he's kind of the heart and soul of this Warriors team. And, he does the little things, but man, he's a handful. I do appreciate him more now. If you listen to I don't really listen to the full podcast, but I see clips of him talking. He's a very intelligent player, and he is the glue to that team that makes them go. But it's not just him this time, right? You got Klay, who's back. And obviously tonight's game 6. So there's this whole mantra of game 6 Klay, which, obviously Klay Thompson is a great player. But for some reason in the playoffs, game 6, for whatever reason, he dominates game 6. So maybe this is the breakout Klay Thompson game tonight. Who knows? And maybe they need that. And I talked about Steph. What about Jordan Poole? Could have been the most improved player in the league. He's contributing, hitting big shots now. I think the biggest surprise is Andrew Wiggins. He was kind of floating around in Minnesota, former number 1 overall pick, looked unmotivated, looked like he didn't care that much to get better. Maybe it was the organization. And you get around greatness when the Warriors made that deal to get him. You get around greatness, you elevate your game, right? I think maybe Wiggins just being in that system with that front office, having Steve Kerr as a coach and all the assistants that they have that are great, they are getting the most out of Andrew Wiggins. That is for sure. He was an all-star starter this year. Andrew freaking Wiggins. That guy was wasting away in Minnesota. And he has been a huge contributor. Back-to-back, big-time double-doubles. I think someone said he had never had more than 11 rebounds in one game. In the last 2 games, he's had more than 11 rebounds. And, before that in his entire career, he hadn't done that. And he's stepping up defensively. That he's been huge for the Warriors. Kevon Looney's a great role-playing center. They have Gary Payton II. Nobody thought he would make it. This dude's, bounced around a lot. They have a bunch of kind of random players that are contributing now. Obviously, Steph is the driving force, and he is looking for his elusive finals MVP that everybody's holding over his head. Whether he gets it or not, he's going to have 4 rings if they win tonight, or if there's a game 7 Sunday night in Golden State. But I don't know. I don't see that. I think I talked about this before. I don't get the hate for Golden State other than they win a lot. What's there to hate about Steph Curry and Klay Thompson? These dudes went to lesser known basketball schools. Steph Curry went to freaking Davidson, and he became the best shooter of all time. Yes, I know his dad played in the NBA, which helps. He's been around the game a lot. Yes, I know Klay Thompson's dad played in the NBA, but he went to Washington State, under-recruited, and it was neither of them were top 5 picks in the NBA draft during their respective years. How can you hate on these guys if you do, other than the fact that they win a lot? And yes, they celebrate a little bit, but everybody celebrates, so I enjoy watching them play. Obviously, it would be nice if the Lakers were there, but I love watching their brand of basketball. No one moves without the ball better than they do. No one makes better passes and better, usually they take good shots within the system. Defensively, they're really, really tough. And they're making a mostly young Boston team, especially the 2 stars, Tatum and Brown. They're making it very difficult on them. So I like what I'm seeing from the Warriors. It would not bother me at all if they won another championship. I think Steph deserves to be in that class. I don't know top 10 yet, but he's definitely floating around that 10, 11, 12 range. Him and Durant are kind of still playing, but outside the top 10 all time. But I mean, even to be discussed on that list is incredible. So as far as Boston goes, they're young, other than like Al Horford and a couple other guys that are older, but for the most part, they're a pretty young team. I know Marcus Smart's is a veteran, but Tatum and Brown and Robert Williams and they have Grant Williams, and they got young dudes that are playing for them. And their time will come if they keep this together. This year, early in the year, they almost sounded like they're going to break this team up. Tatum and Brown apparently weren't passing. Marcus Smart goes out to the media and says, we can't win with these two guys taking every shot, basically. So the new coach comes in, and what an impressive year he's had. Udoka, the head coach of the Celtics, brings a team that was not clicking. And then once the new year hit in January, they're off to the races. And they beat Miami. They beat Brooklyn. They beat Milwaukee on the way to this championship series. Very impressive year for the Celtics. They're starting to really put it together. And maybe this is one of those situations where you got to lose before you win the big chip. So this is part of the maturation process. The Warriors are still in their prime, at least their main players are, and the young dudes are contributing. It's just tough to beat a team with such great talent like the Warriors have, and there's just too much firepower. So, even if the Warriors don't win tonight, I do see them winning a game 7 at home, but it wouldn't shock me if the Warriors won it tonight. I believe that was Boston's best shot in game 5. They had the lead at one point later in the game, and they gave it up and they just started missing shots. So Tatum's getting a lot of criticism for the way he's played in this series. He's only 24 years old. I think we forget sometimes that these guys are still really young, and Tatum's, on his way to being a superstar. He's still very young. So I think with time, he'll be great, even better than he is now. So it's just not the Celtics time, I don't think. It's still the Warriors dynasty is still in full effect. So enjoy the finals game tonight and enjoy my conversation. Very fun conversation with Long Beach sports historian Mike Guardabascio. Nobody knows more about the city of Long Beach than my guest today. He is Mike Guardabascio. He is a sports writer. He's an author. He's written books about Long Beach Poly, which is a sports factory in high school. If you didn't know about that school in California, it's one of the best public schools in Southern California. He actually went to Long Beach Poly as well as a student. He's written books about the basketball scene in Long Beach. He's written books about football in Long Beach, the history of all that stuff. We talk about his upbringing. He's on a podcast called Jenkins and Jones, which is a popular NBA podcast. A lot of fun with this episode. He's a Long Beach State alumni as well. So a lot of fun with Mike G today. So you guys will really enjoy this one. Lots of great stories from Long Beach sports. So he also has a website called the562.org, which is dedicated solely to Long Beach sports. Really cool outlet that the media uses. It's a nonprofit. So you guys will really enjoy this one today with Mike Guardabascio. As always, you can follow me at Too Tall Sports Podcast. That's on Instagram. On Twitter, it's at Too Tall Sports. Check out my YouTube channel. I drop episodes every Thursday morning, 4 a.m. Pacific time. You can watch all the interviews on YouTube. Go check it out there. Subscribe, leave a comment, a like, a share, anything you can do to help support. That'd be great. On the audio side, as you guys always know, Apple Podcasts, scroll all the way down on the main page, hit the 5-star if you could. It would really help boost the show. I need some more 5-star ratings, so that would be very helpful. And also you can leave a review and just tell everybody how great the show is if you're so inclined. So that would be awesome. On Spotify, you can also listen there and give a 5-star rating. So if you haven't done that already, please do so if you listen on Spotify. And it's available on Amazon Music, Google Play, Pandora, wherever you get your podcast, you can find the Too Tall Sports Podcast. Plus, I'm blowing up on TikTok. So for all you youngins out there or old people like myself that are on TikTok, check it out. I do lots of fun videos there and I repost clips. So check out my TikTok at Too Tall Sports Podcast and my Instagram at Too Tall Sports Podcast. And with that, let's get to my episode with Mike Guardabascio. All right, welcome back to the Too Tall Sports Podcast. My next guest is the co-founder and editor of the 562, which is Long Beach's first nonprofit journalism outlet. He's been the sports editor for the Long Beach Press-Telegram, went to school at Long Beach State. He's a Long Beach guy through and through. He's also the author of multiple sports books, which we'll get into, and one of the co-hosts of the Jenkins and Jones podcast. Happy to have him on. He's Mike Guardabascio. What's going on, Mike?
Not too much, man. I'm always wondering why I feel like tired and like I don't have enough time each day. And then you read all that stuff, and it's like, well, that's probably why.
That's why, man. You're doing a lot of stuff. It's awesome.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me, man. Happy to be here.
For
I
sure.
appreciate it.
I know my dad's gonna be thrilled about this episode because he is a Milliken high school alumni, so he's a Long Beach guy through and through. So
I love that.
Yeah, there you go. Would you, just off the top, would you say there's anyone more plugged in, maybe in the last 20 years, than you on Long Beach sports?
No. I mean, I take that, I'm 15 years in as a sports writer. I take it pretty seriously. I'm competitive. My close friends who work with me would tell you I can even be competitive with them sometimes. But I would say in terms of the breadth of it and then connecting it to the history and the knowledge of the history and stuff, probably no.
Okay, well, that's awesome. Hey, you've got your niche and you've dove in on it, so that's awesome.
Yeah.
So before we get to your professional career, let's talk about your upbringing in Long Beach. Just as far as your early years playing sports, who the guys that you remember in the sports scene growing up in the area, whether it was Long Beach State or in the pro sports world. What do you remember about the early years growing up in Long Beach?
Yeah, so I was born in the mid 80s, grew up in the 80s and 90s, graduated from Long Beach Poly in 2002. So pretty rich time. I mean, I think the main thing growing up here was at that time, there's still a ton of stuff filmed in Long Beach, but at that time, if you turned on TV, like every commercial and half of the TV shows that you saw where there's an outside scene, they're all filmed like in my neighborhood or around Long Beach. And so between that and you had like Snoop Dogg and Sublime, you had all these different kinds of musicians and different genres talking about the city. You had Willie McGinnis and, there's so many obviously famous professional athletes. It just sort of felt like we were like secretly in the center of the universe. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. And it wasn't LA, but Long Beach, and we're going to talk a lot about Poly and all that stuff, but yeah, it was a growing sports scene.
For sure, no doubt. And it just sort of had that feel. So, I don't know, like everyone was really serious about sports, kind of whatever you played. Like if you were a water polo player, and, we have Wilson High School here is like an Olympic factory for aquatic sports. Like the aquatics kids are super serious about water polo at like 6 years old, right?
Right.
If you played football, it's like, I'm going to go to Poly. They have 80 NFL guys. So it's just, everyone was like very, even for a guy like me, who is like I'm a like career JV type of an athlete, right? Like you just sort of felt that sense of everything all around you, which was fun. It was a really, really fun place to grow up, for sure.
Sure. No, I totally agree with that. Speaking of doing commercial and stuff, I remember Space Jam. It was filmed at Blair Field when they did the baseball scenes.
I was in the audience for that. As a matter of fact, I was in second grade when they filmed that. My girlfriend at the time, second grade girlfriend.
Yeah.
Hot stuff.
A girl you sat next to in class. Yeah.
Yeah. When we'd hold hands at lunch. Her mom was a state Supreme Court judge, and her dad was like an ER surgeon or something. So they're like very affluent and very well connected. So she came to school and gave me tickets that was like, we got to go see, Michael Jordan's there. You got to see it being filmed. We all got 2 hot dogs, a popcorn, and a drink, which if you're in second grade, right? You're like, holy shit.
That's amazing.
Do you cuss on your podcast?
Go ahead if you want to.
Okay, yeah. It's just like a major holy shit moment, right? You're just like, popcorn and hot dogs. And then at the end of it, I was the most Michael Jordan obsessed kid imaginable, coming from the age that I am, a lot of kids were. And at the end of the filming, he like walked around Blair Field and just, put his hand out to high five all the kids. And I fully like jumped on top of another kid, 60s Beatlemania style, to like graze Michael Jordan's pinky. Which that's at that awesome. Moment was by far the best moment of my life.
Dude, that's amazing. And just so if you don't know, Blair Field is where Long Beach State baseball plays their games. Just FYI, if you didn't know that, I went to Long Beach State also. So lots of Long Beach connections here. As far as going to Long Beach State, was there any doubt for you that you were going to stay close to home and go to school there? Or was there a chance you may get out of your bubble and go to school somewhere else?
Yeah, it was a decision for me for sure. So we had a bunch of various kind of family blow-ups. And so my mom was a single mom with me and my little brother, who was 5 years younger than me. And graduating high school, I did not apply to anywhere that wasn't in Southern California because I wanted to be there for him as he was going through high school.
Yeah.
And it was sort of down to like we had so little money that every college was offering to fully pay for everything, you know?
Nice.
So it was UC Irvine or Long Beach State. And then what happened was I got from this incredible family, the Belknaps, a full scholarship to Long Beach State based on an essay that I had written. And so what we found out was, oh, if I go there, the scholarship will pay tuition and books. And then the FAFSA money, they would just send me as a check. So for the situation our family was in at the time, it was like, oh, I'm going to get paid $3,500 cash a semester to go to school. My mom lived like 2 miles away from campus. So I was like, I'll just ride my bike to school or whatever. So once the money aligned, there was no question for sure.
Yeah.
But it definitely at that time, you know, I think I would have been surprised to find out that I like lived in Long Beach my whole life and made a career here. So I always loved being from Long Beach, but it definitely was not at that time my goal to like live 2 miles from where I grew up, which is where I am right now.
Sure. Hey, you know what? It's not a bad place to be. So
for sure,
much worse places to grow up and stay. So you happen to be at Long Beach during a golden era of baseball. One of them, at least, I saw it was 2002 to 2006. So guys, you know, so much talent. I've talked about these names before just because I went there, but like Jared Weaver, Evan Longoria, Troy Tulowitzki, guys like Abe Alvarez, you know, many more. What do you remember about that era of Long Beach State baseball?
So I worked at the alternative weekly student newspaper. At that time was the Union Weekly. And JJ Fiddler, who's been my writing partner since we graduated college, he came into the Union and started a sports section for us. We've never had a sports. It was like a jokes and whatever kind of a paper, right?
Uh-huh.
And he just was like the biggest evangelist ever for, I was not like a huge college baseball fan. And he was telling us about all these guys and we thought he's bullshitting us, right? You know,
right.
Like if you don't know anything about Jared Weaver and someone's describing the college version of him, it sounds like they're telling you a fairy tale, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, yeah, you go to Blair Field and, you know, it was rocking especially he was the Friday night. And he would come out and pitch on Fridays. And I mean, the atmosphere is just insane and everything. But the number one thing I remember is JJ just being like, this is unbelievable. And it was like I was talking about growing up in Long Beach. It was just that kind of Forrest Gump feeling of like, I'm just some guy who's sort of growing up, but here we are kind of in the middle of all of it. You know what I mean? It's pretty special for sure.
Yeah. Like when I think I was in high school and Weaver was still there and my dad was like, we got to go watch this guy Weaver pitch on Friday night. And you're right. The atmosphere was insane. He was so good in college. It was just, there was so much talent there. And I know they didn't win the College World Series, but like that, it's just to think about the names on that team alone. It's pretty remarkable.
For sure. No doubt. I mean, it's, you know, and it's kind of crazy. You have a couple years worth of teams where if you go back to Blair now, it's the Jared Weaver bullpen, it's the Troy Tulowitzki batting facility, right? Those 2 years are stamped pretty importantly on that program, for sure.
And you know what else? Without a football team, you know, I mean, they had one back in the early 90s, but they got rid of the program. So there's no money really coming in other than baseball and, you know, basketball does a little bit, but
yeah.
So
yeah,
anyway.
I think the Dirtbags are unique, and I'm sure you got a sense of this. I'd love to hear your perspective on it. But you know, Long Beach is like there's 500,000 people here, and so it's bigger than Cleveland. It's bigger than Miami. Like it's a very large city, but there's no but it's, you know, everyone outside of Southern California thinks of it as just kind of like part of LA or whatever. So it doesn't have its own TV channels. We're the biggest city in America by like 150,000 people that doesn't have its own pro sports team, and so like. Everybody roots for the Dodgers, you know, you root for the Lakers, whatever. But the Dirtbags have always been sort of the like pro team for Long Beach. I mean, it just is there's people who do not like baseball, who do not care about Long Beach State, but it's just like you go to Dirtbag games on Sundays with your kids, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
So did you have that sense? I mean, it's definitely bigger than what you would think of as like a traditional college program in terms of its significance in the community.
Yes, and Blair Field is like an iconic place to play. So you get that aspect. Plus, when the Dirtbags are good, and we happen to be a good team when I was there, and you get, you know, the crowds come in, and then the Fullerton rivalry, you know, that's another really cool part of that of the Big West, you know, because the Pac-12, like obviously UCLA, USC, all that stuff, but like kind of like you're saying, Long Beach is like the lesser known UCLA, USC program, but it's still a cool atmosphere to be a part of. Yeah. So during those years, like you mentioned, you were writing for the school paper. When did you really commit to like, I'm going to be a sports writer and a journalist after I graduate?
Yeah, that's sort of stumbled backwards into it. Like I knew from when I was like very young, like early elementary school, I knew I wanted to be a writer. And I wanted to write, novels and short stories and poems and stuff. And obviously you get into college and if you have any self-awareness at all, you realize like that is not a viable career option at 22 years old,
Yeah.
So I just wanted to write somewhere and do something. So I'm publishing short stories or whatever. And I'm realizing like, wow, the biggest success of my life is $25, right? Like this is not going to be, and my girlfriend and I, at the time is now my wife, it's like, we've been together since we're 18. We're getting ready to graduate college. It's like, we're engaged. I'm like, yeah, I probably should think about like a job. So JJ and I were close friends from working at the paper. We both had really crappy jobs. I was like the assistant editor at I won't say the name of the company. It was a trade magazine company, and they had magazines like School Bus Monthly and like Nails Monthly. So it was like, just like trade magazines like that, right? So I'd be doing like a 600-word feature on like the bus driver of the month or something like that. And, you're 22, 23, you feel pretty good about your talents and abilities. And, I won some awards and all this stuff. And I'm like, man, I'm just withering over here. Like, this sucks. And so JJ had the idea. He's like, hey, I really want to start a sports website in Long Beach. I need a Long Beach guy to do it. JJ's from the Inland Empire and came out here for college. He's like, would you be interested in doing it? And I was just like, fuck yes. Like, get me out of here. I'm young enough to fail. I'm young enough to not make any money at something, but like, let's try something. And to my total surprise, to be honest with you, because I was not a journalism major. I'd never taken any journalism classes, and I had never covered a sporting event. I just was a fan. To my total surprise, by the end of like the first year, I was like, this is the best thing ever. Like, it's so fun. Being a local sports writer is great because you're not like plugged in with the Angels or something where you're like, it's just the same thing over and over and over again.
Right.
It's like, it's football season. This is exciting. Okay, cool. Now it's basketball and soccer season. Like, it's always something different. And it, it changes, which I kind of need to keep me interested. So
Sure.
I fell in love with it pretty quick. So by the time we were 23, 24 and we launched, I was pretty locked into, if I can do this for 40 years and do everything else I want to do on the side and in the summer, I'm in for it.
Very cool. No, that's great. I admire that you've, dove in on that. You've been doing it ever since. It's very cool. I want to go to your first book in 2012 called Football in Long Beach, and we'll get to your other books in a sec. But the area has produced, like we mentioned, so much talent over the years. And a place like Long Beach, Long Beach Poly, which I'll dive into Long Beach Poly also. What are the things that stood out to you when you wrote that book about the history of football in Long Beach?
Well, the company that published it, the History Press, had an editor named Jerry, and I'm forgetting his last name, but he approached me and was like, I have an idea for a cool project. He knew a little bit about Southern California sports. He was a East Coast guy, but he's like, I'd really be interested in a book about this. And so I said, like I said, I wanted to be a writer. Someone offers you to write a book, you're like, oh, that's awesome.
Sure.
So looking back now, it's like, it was such a like obscenely small amount of money that I probably should have said no. But what jumped out to me was just like, I knew everything about kind of my era and up to the present moment, but I had never really been like a history guy or a research guy. And it forced me to, like, I went through every yearbook of every Long Beach high school back to the 1890s, and you look at old newspapers. And what I found was like, there's just so many great stories. And I think because I had a good connection with the community, I had an ability to kind of tell some of those stories of, to 16-year-olds and not have their eyes glaze over. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think a big part of that is just everyone here is pretty loyal to the community and to whatever high school they're at. So hearing that, like, oh, this high school had this crazy thing, like Poly had a black quarterback in the 20s, right? Like, kids hear that and it's interesting to them because they've watched Remember the Titans, whatever. And so that was what kind of stood out to me. Was it was just sort of like this big door unlocked. I'm like, oh, there's all these great stories out there and no one else is looking for them, right? Like, no one else is like hitting those yearbooks. Like, I wonder what happened to this kid or something like that. So that was what it was for me, for sure. It was definitely a completely new tool to put in the toolbox.
Sure. Yeah. You also wrote a book called Basketball in Long Beach, which piqued my interest because I also am a huge basketball fan. So plenty of talent you can speak on as well in basketball, but also the coaches. Some people forget, obviously the Long Beach people know, but like Jerry Tarkanian coached at Long Beach State, Lute Olson, Arizona great, coached at Long Beach State, Tex Winter I saw, who's all in the Hall of Fame. How would you describe basketball in Long Beach and the local tradition over the years with that?
Well, Long Beach State, you'd have to say it's the best stepping stone in college basketball, right?
Yeah. it's
like,
everybody that couldn't get into SC and UCLA.
Right. Well, and just with those coaches, it's just, Tarkanian, obviously, Tark, a lot of his success was at Long Beach, and deservedly. I mean, he was right there with the John Wooden teams and all. So a lot of great history there. But all the other guys you mentioned, Tex Winter, Lute Olson, you have these guys, who are Naismith Hall of Famers for absolutely nothing that they did at Long Beach State.
Right.
And I think when we're doing the research for the book, you go to Long Beach State, okay, you're aware of sort of vaguely the old guys say we were good at basketball in the 70s, but you don't really know that stuff. So learning about those names and seeing who really was there, it was nuts to me. I mean, it was like, and hearing the sort of comedy of errors of why we weren't able to keep any of those guys. It was really funny. And I really enjoyed learning about it. But yeah, it's I don't think any other college has more basketball Hall of Famers who've coached there than Long Beach State. And they've made, I think it's 11 NCAA tournament appearances in school history. It's just really, really bizarre. But only when
only when they have a senior-led team that gets in the Big West tournament and wins.
Totally, and the Tark years are different, right? It's you're losing to the John Wooden team that's undefeated that year by 1 point in the in the Elite Eight, stuff like that. Right. So seeing that that genuine history, but then also how determined the NCAA was to not have Long Beach State be up there with UCLA. There's so many great stories in Long Beach about Tark. I got a chance to interview his widow after he passed away. And yeah, it's just it's deep seated. I mean, she still hates the NCAA.
Oh, wow.
Hates. And I mean, with a capital H, he was inducted posthumously into a Hall of Fame here, and she came and gave a speech and starts banging on the podium, and however old she is, that damn NCAA.
Wow.
It's incredible, but they really felt UCLA's paying kids and doing all this other stuff. Tark's doing the same stuff. And they look at John Wooden and they're like, he's a saint. And they look at Tark and they're like, because he's Armenian or whatever else, they're looking at him as a shady backroom dealer, Right. So those feelings are really deep seated in that family and for Long Beach State basketball fans at that time too, for sure.
And that's before he went to UNLV when they had all the scandals too. So this was 70s, you're saying, right?
Yeah. No, and that was part of why he went to UNLV, and that was part of why they weren't able to keep. I think it was Tex Winter was right after him, and he was I would have stayed forever, but we were trying to operate under these sanctions the NCAA had put on us, and I just couldn't do it.
Sure.
And then Lute Olson similarly. Lute Olson, his goal was to live and retire in Long Beach. He coached at Long Beach City College and then took the job at Long Beach State, and that's where he wanted to be. And it was there was all of these sanctions and stuff over him, and Arizona calls, and I think someone talked him into it. I think Tark or someone had actually had to talk him into it because he just did not want to leave Long Beach. And they're like, listen, I know it's hard to go out of the nest and all this other stuff. And then obviously it worked out okay for him.
Built up Arizona, man. A great program. For sure. I want to bring this up because it's kind of a lesser appreciated part about basketball in Long Beach was the pro summer league that used to be there. I remember going to the Pyramid and watching random guys like Lamar Odom back in the day in summer league. So it was cool. It was at the Pyramid. As a kid, I remember that. What do you remember about the pro summer league at Long Beach?
Well, like I said, we didn't have a lot of money when I was growing up. So the pro summer league was it was the best because for $40, you could get a summer pass for a kid. And it was literally any game for the 2 months, the month, whatever, 6 weeks it was running. And it was insane because some of them, when Kobe Bryant, and Derek Fisher made their Lakers debuts in the Pyramid, at the pro league. And so that's packed, right? I mean, that was we're standing on top of each other. But there would also just be Sunday 10 a.m. games where Magic Johnson's All-Stars are playing against, like you said, the Rising Clippers or something.
Yeah.
And you would go and I'd literally just sit next to Magic Johnson for 10 minutes in the Pyramid. And there's 600 people there or something, there were just these total incredible moments like that. I understand why they moved to Vegas. I understand why it's better for people financially, whatever else. But yeah, I will always miss the pro league, and the pyramid was super special for sure.
Yeah, it was really cool. You go and get, like you're saying, get super close to the players, and it's just like you're seeing these guys before they get in the league, and it was an interesting thing back then.
For sure. Yeah, definitely. And now it's like, it's unimaginable anything like that existing.
Right. Now Vegas,
it's an
right?
open way,
Right. And the summer league, like people like sell out the Thomas and Mack Center at UNLV for the games. Like it's a whole big thing now.
For sure.
Okay, so now we get to talk about your high school, Long Beach Poly. You wrote a book called The History of Long Beach Poly, an in-depth look into the sports factory that it is and still is. And I'll talk about this year's class in a little bit, but there was racial tension there. There was, like you mentioned, celebrities like Snoop Dogg, Cameron Diaz going to Poly. What was it like to uncover the deep history of Long Beach Poly?
It was probably the most rewarding experience of my career, to be honest with you. I had kind of stumbled on some of these bigger themes that you mentioned with like the racial tension and how that stuff was kind of overcome in a way that really not a lot of other inner city high schools were able to. I uncovered that stuff doing the research for the football book, the basketball book. I went to a poly that was like 25% Black, 25% white, 25% Hispanic, 25% Asian. And it was like the tail end of the 90s. So off campus, really serious gang activity and issues. On campus, no appreciation at 16 years old for how unique it was that all those people are together. Everyone loves each other. Everyone's making fun of each other. But there's this sort of sense of like family and community. And then you go to college and all of a sudden it's like, are we not all friends anymore? Like, what have you? And just no appreciation for how unique that environment was. So to be doing the research for the football book and all that stuff, and to see like, oh, there are these really serious race riots in the 70s. Like, oh, they almost closed the school because they had, like 50 kids going to the hospital from these fights. That stuff was really, it was shocking to me. And then it was just so interesting of like, well, we're facing as a society and as a country a lot of these same problems, obviously. So how is this one high school in the inner city able to figure this stuff out? And what are the lessons that could be learned there that the rest of the country, the rest of the state could learn from? Because if you look at the line that stuck in my head was the superintendent at the time, or the superintendent when I was a kid was a counselor at Poly at the time. And his son and I actually went to elementary school and high school together. So I'd known him since I was a little kid. He told me Poly was the only inner city, it was the only public school in America that had race riots that still has white kids that go to school there. And if you think about it, you go back in the history of like Compton was an all-white suburb of LA for a very long time. Then so now there's diversity. Okay, there's white kids and there's Black kids. Then there's a race riot. All the white kids disappear. Yeah. And according to the coaches that I know who coached there at the time, basically overnight. I mean, literally from like a Monday to a Friday, now it's an all-Black school. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so Poly was able to, even up into this current era, like maintain its connection to each part of its community. And I was really fascinated in how it was able to do that. So the sports stuff factors into it for sure. But just those like large, that was why I wanted to do it as a non-sports book, because the kind of like larger social implications of that stuff was just super fascinating to me.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. It's cool to find all that stuff out, and it's still able to now, even that's what I want to go to next is this year's sports class of athletes there. 42 athletes from Long Beach State signed athletic scholarships, which is a record according to, I think the athletic director said from his knowledge. How does Poly continue to dominate after all these years, and break these kind of scholarship records like that?
Yeah, I get asked this question a fair amount, and it's always like I want to start by saying I don't really know, and no one does, right? Because if you could figure out what the formula was, you'd apply it to some other 5,000 student inner city public high school.
Right. Yeah, and it's not a private school. It's not Mater Dei. It's not Santa Margarita. Yeah. It's not these other places. It's crazy.
Well, and the like one thing that's unique about it that came out of that tension in the 70s is like there's these academic magnets on campus that are like the smartest kids in the city go to that high school. And even when it was really, really heavy gang activity around it, the smartest kids in the city went to that high school. So the superintendent I mentioned, Carl Cohn, he told me he left Long Beach to become the superintendent in San Diego. he tried to do something similar there. And the parents were like, we will run you out of town tomorrow if you try and send our kids from the suburbs into the inner cities. So part of it is that history, and that like, it just is a little bit more progressive and diverse here. Not that there aren't, the same historical issues that there are pretty much everywhere in America, but like, it has always had a really good blend and a mix of a lot of different kinds of kids. So in that class of 42 athletes that signed scholarships, you have very affluent kids who grew up in like multi-million-dollar mansions in Long Beach. And you also have really, really poor inner city kids who kind of overcome everything. And you have all those sort of, it's what's interesting to me about my job. You have all those different kinds of stories all happening in the same place, and they're friends with each other.
Right.
And that was, and I sort of grew up in that, so I have an appreciation for it and a connection to it. But I think that the diversity is the number one thing in answer to your question, socioeconomically and racially. And then there's just a great tradition, so if you grow up in Long Beach, and I grew up on the other side of town from Poly, but there's just sort of that atmosphere of like, if you're really trying to compete and you're really trying to be great in something, that's where you're going to end up, because of that tradition and because of how long they've been good for, so
sure.
Yeah, I think the diversity and the reputation are kind of the drivers on a lot of that stuff.
Right. Because I'm thinking, a regular non-private, so public high school, 10 to 15, 20 kids getting scholarships is huge.
A miracle. Yeah, for sure.
Right. That doesn't happen very often, but 42.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a different level.
And I think we've been covering sports 15 years. I think it's the 5th time that they've had 40 or more. I mean, it's so 42 where they are now, like to get that high is rare, but like high 30s, low 40s is kind of where they sit, I mean, it's pretty remarkable for sure. Wow. I try hard not, like, people are used to it here, and I try hard not to take it for granted for the reasons that you just said.
Right. No, exactly. Let's talk about the podcast that you're on. You're a part of a podcast called Jenkins and Jones. You're one of the co-hosts. What's it like to be on with those guys? They're both characters, and you guys have a lot of fun on there. So what's it like to be on the podcast with them?
I love it. The guys, John and Tyler, that I host the show with, which are Dragonfly Jones and LeJethro Jenkins, if you're a Twitter person.
Yeah, they have huge followings. I don't really know who they were, honestly, until recently.
Yeah. I was just like a big fan of theirs on Twitter. Like, I just thought they were like the funniest guys in the world. And they started a podcast. We're so old. It might be like 7 years ago. And I was like, I just thought it was the funniest thing ever. There was like no format. They had no equipment. It sounded like it was recorded on like, tin cans with a string run between them. But it was the funniest thing I'd ever heard, And so you felt like you're like a kid in the 20s or something, where you're like the 1920s, where you're like, fiddling with an antenna to get some like secret broadcast or something. But it was like my favorite thing ever. And they had me on to talk about my family. They were like, we're looking for someone to interview about this kind of a thing. And so I volunteered and was on, and it went really well. And they basically just kind of kept having me back on. And then I ended up as a co-host. And now, we're on Colin Cowherd's Volume Podcast Sports Network, which is, I think, famously right now the network that Draymond Green's podcast is on.
That he will not stop podcasting on during
no matter finals. What. Yeah. My favorite line ever from a podcaster, the win, lose, or draw, you're going to get this podcast, which I love. But they're a blast, man. I mean, they're two of my best friends in the world. And I'm very fortunate that at that podcast and at the 562, it was my goal to just write and be creative and have fun and work with my friends. And I'm, in my late 30s, and I've been able to just kind of do that, for my whole life. So.
Yeah, no, definitely. And speaking of the 562, I want to mention that it's, the website for local journalists it's the 562.org. Tell us why you wanted to help create that and what it means to be part of like a nonprofit media outlet, but still kind of doing local stuff too.
Yeah. So the 60-second version is JJ and I, like I mentioned, like we started covering Long Beach sports together like 15 years ago. And it's basically always been the same job, but it's been at a bunch of different publications. So like we were at a startup website when we started. We're at a weekly newspaper. We got hired by the daily newspaper in town. And so it just kind of, kept growing bigger, more money and more readers and stuff as you're going through time. That local newspaper is owned by a hedge fund that at some point decided like there's too much money being spent on local stuff. So we got laid off when this was like 4 or 5 years ago. And we kind of thought like, hey, we had a great 10-year run. This was really fun. We put up on Twitter hey, thanks, it's been a great 10 years. Like, we've been let go. It is what it is. And the amount of people who immediately were like, I'll give you money, and we
Yeah.
we had people, Andy Kerr, who's our publisher, came to us and was like, hey, I have he was a cross country parent, right? We covered his kid running cross country. He's like, I have an experience setting up nonprofits. If you were interested in starting this outlet as a nonprofit, I would do all the paperwork for you. Like,
Wow.
as a volunteer. So he got the 501c3 taken care of, etc., which is the only reason that we exist. And the idea behind it being a nonprofit was basically like, we've sort of seen what for-profit media can do that's not so great. If we truly wanted to run this as a community service where every dollar people gave us just gets spent back in the community.
Sure.
And we have a paid high school internship program. We have a ton of freelancers who work for us as well. That was sort of the idea behind it. And, so far, like I said, we're 4 or 5 years in, and people have been generous enough to keep us afloat. So it's great. I didn't know anything about any of it. I'm not like a crusader for nonprofit journalism. I'm
Sure.
a huge fan of it now. But yeah, we kind of just went into it because it was like the smartest people we knew were advising us to try this. And it's been great for sure. It's definitely needed, I think, especially in local media, when you just look at how, they call them news deserts, but you look at how these like newspapers have 100 years of history are just kind of drying up and blown away in so many communities. And I think that the nonprofit model is a great sort of offset to some of those economic forces. Yeah.
And just to want to be clear on it, it's not covering pro sports, right? It's just local high school, college.
Yeah, we cover, so we just say everything in Long Beach. So it's like 99% high school, college. We do cover a pro event. The Grand Prix is an IndyCar race. So the same series that runs at the Indy 500, they have a race on the streets of Long Beach. We do, occasionally have pro stuff come through. And if the Angels move to Long Beach, which they're talking about, I guess we'd have to kind of make a decision about that. But
right.
Yeah, we call it the 562 because it's basically everything that happens in Long Beach, but most of our sports are high school, college for sure.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I did hear your nickname on the podcast. Someone, or you referred to maybe yourself as Guardy B, which is an amazing name.
Yeah, John gave me that a little while ago, and it was one of those like, don't bother trying to fight it because it'll just make it worse, Sure.
Yeah. No, I was gonna ask you when that all started because that's a hilarious name.
Yeah, I think it was when Cardi B was kind of first getting popular, and he threw that out there at some point. I don't know. I've been fortunate enough to have really close Black friends my whole life, which means that I have a variety of really ludicrous nicknames.
There you go. Hey, that's part of that.
Yes, in the back pocket at all times.
The diversity of Long Beach. There you go. Okay, last couple things. If you had to pick, I know you've covered Long Beach sports forever. A couple of your favorite athletes that have come through there, or guys that you remember, or recent guy, whoever, anybody.
There's a guy named Chase DeYoung who's a pitcher with the Pirates right now, who actually just got a win at Dodger Stadium when the Pirates swept the Dodgers insanely. Yeah. But he's like one of the best human beings that I've ever known. And he was that way. Like, we covered him. They won a Pony World Series in Long Beach when he was 13. And so it's the first time we're talking to him. And we just like, you talk to him and you walk over to his parents and be like, is this kid an alien? Like, what, where did he come from? And so he was one of those guys who, he was a huge recruit at Wilson High School, drafted out of high school, and just one of those guys who you just like knew he was going to be successful. And so he's someone who, anytime he's back in town, we have lunch with him. I love him.
Nice.
Juju Smith-Schuster, who played at Poly, who's with the Chiefs now.
Sure.
Similarly, like, used to babysit my son when I would go to Poly and cover track meets, because he has six younger siblings. And so he literally, like, he saw me covering a track meet, sort of holding my son, who's a baby at the time. And he's like, I could watch him for you. And I was like, huh? And he was like, I'm like always watching all my little, so he's like, that's fine. I love babies.
Wow.
And so he's just like another one of those guys, like all-time great guy, was finding ways to give back even while he was in high school. You know what I mean? Stuff like that. So
that's really cool.
Those are the guys for me, because we get to know them so well and we spend so much time with them that, like, there's a ton of mega talents here. But the ones that always really jump out to me are those where it's just like, wow, what a good, like, this kid has every reason in the world to be an asshole. Right. If I was 16 and I had everyone telling me I'm the next great thing, I would have been an asshole for sure, And so, you know, so to maintain a sense of like perspective and balance, I'm always so impressed by that. Because yeah, I don't know. I barely could pull that off now. I definitely couldn't have pulled it off, you know, when I was a teenager.
That's crazy. Okay. I know I got to keep going. Okay. While you were at Poly, who was the biggest name at the time that you remember?
So I graduated with a class that was the first and only still in history football class with 5 first-team parade All-Americans in one class at one high school.
Damn.
And so all 5 of those guys were like, I mean, you know, some of the stories from that era, it's like Coach O, who coached at LSU. You know, he was the Long Beach recruiter for Pete Carroll at USC at the time, and he had a key to the back gate at Poly. So he would just come in and he'd just take those, go, you guys want to go to Roscoe's, you know, whatever you want to do. So those 5 guys were all just like epic. I was friends with one of them, which is Mercedes Lewis.
Oh, of course, UCLA.
Played at UCLA and then has been in the NFL, is still in the NFL for the upcoming season for his 17th season.
Wow.
We've maintained, you know, we've kept in touch and stuff, but he was definitely the guy for me that was like, he was in my first class, my first day at Poly. It was I think a world history class, and it was just me and him and this other guy who we're both still friends with, sitting there kind of cracking jokes. And then as you get older, you realize like, oh, this guy is he's headed on a very different life path. Right. But my wife went to UCLA, so we used to bump into him and get smoothies and stuff like that at the dorms. You know,
very cool.
He was a guy who all 5 of those guys were physically huge people. But if you know Southern California football, the class was Herschel Dennis, Darnell Bing, Manny Wright, and Winston Justice all went to USC. And then 3 of them made it to the NFL. And then Mercedes went to UCLA because he was not so much as sneak me out the back gate to buy me things kind of a guy. He went to UCLA and then obviously is still in the NFL. So that was a pretty insane group to be around for sure.
Damn, that's crazy. Okay, so where can everybody follow you, find the 562 website, the podcast, all that stuff?
Yeah, so I'm at Guardabascio, Guard, blah, 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 on Twitter. If you come across me, the 562.org is all our Long Beach stuff. Jenkins and Jones is Jenkins and Jones NBA stuff, if you're looking for that. And yeah, like I said, you've opened my eyes as to how much I'm overworking myself, I guess. So
yeah, man, you're doing a lot of stuff. That's great. No, I know, and as busy as you are, I really appreciate you carving out some time to jump on with me. So I appreciate it, man. Hope we can catch up soon.
Oh, for sure, dude. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
My thanks to Mike Guardabascio. Please go check out the562.org. That is his website covering local Long Beach sports. Check out the Jenkins and Jones podcast as well. And you can find Mike Guardabascio, if you can spell it, on Twitter. I'll put it down in the show notes, but give him a follow on social media. And my thanks to him. A lot of fun on that episode and the history of Long Beach. It's awesome. So, I am a Long Beach State dirtbag, so former baseball guy. But I appreciate having Mike on. It was a lot of fun, and hope you guys enjoyed that one. As always, you can follow me at Too Tall Sports Podcast. That's on Instagram and TikTok. You can follow me there. Twitter, it's at Too Tall Sports. You can check out on my stuff on Twitter. And also my YouTube channel. So every Thursday morning, I drop episodes on the video and audio side. 4 a.m. Pacific time. If you're up that early, that's when they drop every Thursday morning. Check it out. You see the episodes. If you want to watch them on YouTube, please subscribe, like, share, all that stuff. Leave a comment. That'd be awesome. And if you want to just listen to the episodes, you can go to Apple and Spotify and other outlets like Pandora, Amazon Music, Google Play, wherever you get your podcast. You can just type in Too Tall Sports Podcast. If you're on Apple, you can scroll all the way down, hit the 5-star rating. That would be very helpful for the show. Love to boost those ratings. Leave a comment on the bottom of the show as well. That would be awesome on Apple. On Spotify, you can now do 5-star rating. So if you listen on Spotify, you can hit the 5-star there as well. So anyway, with that, thank you for listening this week. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you next time for another great episode. Peace.